My name is Greg Penner. I am the worship associate today. In 2001, when my son was heading off for his first year at college, I sheepishly handed him a box of condoms and said something like, "Here, you might need these." Sadly, that was the extent of the sex education that I gave him. And I did even less with my daughter. As unforgivably insufficient as that was, it was still more than I received when I was young. I grew up in a Catholic family. We didn't talk about these kind of things. My only recollection of any kind of conversation with my parents was when my mom caught me making out with my high school girlfriend. Afterward, Mom said something cryptic like, "That kind of behavior could possibly lead to a bad outcome." That was it. Health class at Central Catholic High School in the late 70s. Not much better. So I cruised along in my ignorance. I was sexually active, but not sexually educated. I got married at 25 and immediately had a stepson and a daughter on the way. Even then, sex was not something I talked about. It was often on my mind, but I never discussed it in an open, collaborative, respectful adult way. And honestly, that all seemed okay to me. All my life experience told me that sex was just not something one talked about. That's what I was taught, and that's what I taught my kids. I've been teaching religious education here since 2003, and OWL since 2013. I've taught the full year middle school OWL 6 times. Last year, we did 5th and 6th grade OWL for the first time. And in the fall, we taught adult OWL. We taught high school OWL once before and are teaching it again right now. Clearly, there's something that I love about teaching OWL, or rather, many things that I love about teaching OWL. In the beginning, part of it was learning to talk comfortably about sex along with the youth. I think I did a good job of appearing confident and relaxed at the start in a fake it till you make it kind of way. Happily, I don't have to fake it anymore. My own growth in comfort and confidence felt liberating. Part of it was an indirect way of making amends for the lack of education that I gave my children. Part of it is that it's really fun to teach. It's interesting and important. It's personal and it's universal. Demystifying it and making it accessible is a rich, vital process. Seeing the youth become more and more comfortable with the topics is also very rewarding. They are so squirmy at the start. By the end of the year, they are having conversations at a level they couldn't have imagined 8 months earlier. And having youth who took it in middle school choose to come back for our 12-week high school OWL class validates how important it is to them. And part of it feels like a really powerful spiritual service. Sexuality, gender, attraction, relationship, sexual health and safety, consent and love and respect are so crucial to each person. To be able to give the youth this knowledge and confidence to help them know themselves better and have the tools for knowing others, to replace bad information with good, all based on our UU values, it feels like a blessing I get to bestow on these youth. And in return, it is a blessing for me to be able to do this work with them. Today, in our high school class, Big Kid Owl, I like to call it, we are having one of my favorite lessons. It's a guest panel with folks with different gender and identity experiences who have come to share their stories and answer the kids' questions. It's a powerful class full of curiosity, compassion, and respect. Elaine Cozart and Amelia Sparks are leading it, and it's my day off from teaching. But when I'm done with my part of the service, I'll be heading back there because I don't want to miss it.
These are some of the program values for the upper high school edition of the Our Whole Lives curriculum. Everyone is entitled to dignity, self-worth, and their own attitudes and beliefs about sexuality. Knowledge about human sexuality is helpful, not harmful. Everyone has the right to have accurate information about sexuality and to have their questions answered. Healthy sexual relationships are consensual, non-exploitative, mutually pleasurable. Everyone feels good physically, emotionally, and ethically. Safer, developmentally appropriate to the age, maturity, and cognitive ability of the people involved. Based on mutually understood expectations and care. Honest, including honoring commitments made to others. And sexual intercourse is only one of many valid ways of expressing sexual feelings. And we are called to enrich our lives by expressing sexuality in ways that enhance our humanity and express care, joy, and pleasure. Everyone has the right and obligation to make responsible choices. That all people with all types of bodies are whole, holy, and good, and are of equal human worth and value, entitled to equal human rights. And that all forms of gender identity and expression and being attracted to the same or the opposite or multiple genders or not having sexual attraction are all within the normal range of human experience. So if you saw any of the announcements, this service is called Let's Talk About Sex. And when I announced the title of this service, a congregant told her child what the topic of the service was. "Oh God, please tell me there's RE that day," was the very normal age-appropriate response. Unitarian Universalist congregations, as well as the United Church of Christ congregations, have been known for talking about sex and teaching comprehensive, fact-based sexuality education, also values-based, called the Our Whole Lives or OWL curriculum for almost 30 years now to different ages of people. But why is this so important? Well, frankly, we heard why it was so important already, but I didn't get those until I'd written this, so you're going to bear with me for just a minute if I repeat a little bit. But here is one story, and I'm going to ask you to take care of your hearts during this one, as it does talk, though not graphically, about the sexual assault of a teenager. I have a good friend, and I'll call her Margie. It's not her name. Margie is currently a Unitarian Universalist, but she grew up United Pentecostal. And United Pentecostals are a very conservative Christian denomination, known for speaking in tongues and an embodied style of worship that involves being filled with the Holy Spirit. They are also known for conservative dress, especially for women, and traditional gender roles, as well as being part of what we would call purity culture. When my friend Margie was 15 years old, she went to a large church event where she was supposed to be chaperoned by a married couple in their 20s. For some unknown reason, they let her be driven back to their house by a man from the church who was 25. He raped her on the way home. That in and of itself would be a tragic story. But in my opinion, the worst part of it is that my friend completely blamed herself. She was wearing a long, ankle-length modest skirt and was covered by clothing from her wrists to her ankles. She had no interest in this man at all, but somehow her church had taught her that men were brought down by loose women, and that if he couldn't control his normal male urges, that must have been her fault. The couple kept her at their house overnight. They washed the blood out of her dress and took her home to her house the next day. They didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want her to get in trouble. It was years before she told anyone else what happened. And this, my friends, is why we teach fact-based, value-based, comprehensive sexuality education. Because purity culture is deeply damaging. Because a religion that says that sin is deeply sinful before marriage and a blessing within it without touching or teaching anything else at all doesn't lead to good outcomes, sexually or otherwise. Nadia Bowles-Weber, a Lutheran pastor much cooler than I am, writes in her book Shameless, a case for not feeling bad about feeling good. In the 10 years I've been pastor at Home for All Sinners and Saints, I've known young married couples who did what the church told them and waited, only to discover that they could not, on the day of their wedding, suddenly flip a switch in their brains and in their bodies and suddenly go from relating to sex as sinful and dirty and dangerous to relating to sex as joyful and natural and God-given. As defined in the Our Whole Lives curriculum, sexuality is a broad spectrum of attitudes and feelings and behaviors. It's learning about your own body. It's being nurtured and fed and cared for as an infant and a child. It's hugging a friend. It's how you identify your own gender and sexual orientation. It's 100 things that we don't think about as sexuality, as well as the things that we do place under that umbrella. And yes, it's body parts and puberty and pleasure and consent and conceiving and having babies. It's how to avoid having babies when you don't want to, and how to avoid sexually transmitted infections. It's about body image and sexual scripts and how to give and receive sexual and sensual pleasure in a body that's aging or changing or doesn't move in all the conventional ways. It's consent and confidence and closeness and being empowered to negotiate what you want and what you don't want. And we think that that stuff is important to teach and to talk about in church. I first taught OWL to 8th and 9th graders at First Unitarian Church in Portland in 2002 and 2003. I taught it again in 04-05. We alternated it with coming of age, and teaching those two classes was honestly what made me decide to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. My family didn't attend a conservative church at all when I was growing up, but my junior and senior years in high school, I babysat for the local Assemblies of God church. They were less strict than the United Pentecostals, and I was literally the only teenager there, but I was still exposed to some of the damaging teachings about sexuality. The moment I realized that I didn't fit in, clear as day, was when a guest minister who was a man who used a wheelchair and was like popping wheelies and going all around the dais, preaching like, loud and bombastically for 45 minutes. But the line that I remember was he slapped his thigh and he said, "I think God would just say that to all those women's libbers." And I just went, oh crap. Because I knew that I was one of those women's libbers. I have been pretty lucky in that I was able to teach my kids about sexuality. Some of that, in some ways, had something to do with the fact that my kids have two moms. And my oldest in particular was never quiet about that. So somebody on an airplane would say, "Oh, you have such pretty blue eyes. Do you get those from your dad?" And she's like, "I don't have a dad. I have two moms and a donor." And it's like any chance of just being, incognito during the flight went out the door. And then at 6, Kink radio station, the radio station that I listened to a lot in Portland, was running like public service ads about syphilis because syphilis was on the rise. And so my 6-year-old asked me repeatedly, "What's syphilis?" And I'm like, okay. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection. Sexually transmitted means X. Sex means X. And she's like, "No, I just want to know what happens to you." I'm like, okay, all right. As your minister, I've had the opportunity to help teach one section of the 10th and 12th grade OWL that Greg taught. And then I got to teach adult OWL this last fall. And I love that we teach adult OWL because our sexual questions at 15 are totally different than they are at 40 or 60 or 80, but I'm guessing we still have them. How does my body work now? How do my partner and I cope with different levels of desire? How do I still feel attractive with stretch marks or a mastectomy? What even does sex look like with erectile dysfunction? How do I date after divorce? How do I get my needs for human contact and touch met when my spouse has dementia or has died? And maybe most important, how do I pass along better messages about bodies and affection and touch to my children than maybe the ones I got? In our kindergarten and first grade OWL that we're teaching now, the central message is that parents and caregivers are your child's first and most important sexuality educators. Each class session offers something called Home Link, where parents are told what kids did in class that day and given suggestions for continuing the conversation at home, ranging from book selections to encouragement to talk about some of these subjects at home, not just this week, but in the future. Several of the OWL programs have been updated recently, and this is great because as a living tradition, we know that science and best practices evolve, and we think it's really important to use the most up-to-date information possible. Sometimes that's more information than is appropriate for young children. I kind of love how this class handles the "how babies get made" question. They read a book that introduces the fundamental concept that the same elements are always involved in making babies: an egg, a sperm, and a uterus. And as the adult version of the book says, there are currently about 25 ways to combine that egg, sperm, and uterus, and kids do not need to know all of that. And so what they say is, we talk about the egg and sperm and uterus, and then you go home and talk about how your family was created in whatever language works for you. And another thing that's changed is how we look at gender. Someone born with boy parts will probably, but not always, grow up to be a man, and vice versa. There is no such thing as girl toys and boy toys, or girl clothes and boy clothes. And how one acts as a child, what toys they like to play with, or what clothes they wear, doesn't tell you for sure what they'll be like as a grown-up. It also has some new information about preventing child sexual abuse that was new information for me. They warn against focusing on kids telling someone about the abuse. Because A, that can make survivors feel guilty. Again, like purity culture, if you didn't tell because you were scared or threatened, or because abusers often groom children so thoroughly that they don't realize that what's happening is wrong, and then later they feel like it's their fault because they didn't tell. And so instead, OWL teaches kids to use correct language for body parts, knowing sometimes that that's enough. If you have a kid that can say, "Why are you touching my vulva?" That might stop somebody, to be honest. They teach kids about concepts of personal space and consent, and it teaches adults that it's their job to protect children. Everyone with kids in their lives can help with this. If a child doesn't want to be hugged, they get to make that choice. That is sometimes really hard for us because I know we want to hug our grandkids. But giving them the choice to say no will help them in the long run. I'm going to skip that. In OWL, they use a concept called circles of sexuality, because I know for some of us, you know, when we hear things like people are sexual from the time they're born until the time they die, and we're like, define sexual. But Owl uses this concept called circles of sexuality, which includes sensuality, enjoying one's own body and its ability to respond to pleasurable sensation of any kind. So for an infant, being bathed or snuggled or nursed or bounced are all examples of sensuality. They're all examples of kids feeling comfortable and at home in their bodies. For a kid or a grown-up, drinking hot cocoa snuggled under a blanket, petting a dog or a cat or dancing, taking a hot bath or eating something delicious all count as sensual experiences. Intimacy is another circle of sexuality. How we learn to trust and be vulnerable with another person. We start with our parents or caregivers and expand that circle to include friends and siblings and extended family and maybe a romantic partner. But romantic intimacy isn't necessarily the pinnacle, it's just another type. Sexual identity is another circle. This includes your sex assigned at birth, your gender identity, your gender expression and roles, and your sexual orientation. Being asexual is a perfectly valid sexual orientation. You could be straight or gay or bi or queer or pan. You could be monogamous or polyamorous. You can have the same orientation or gender identity your entire life, or they can shift with time. Sexual health and reproduction includes facts and attitudes about anatomy and reproduction. This is what we often think happens in a sexuality education class, and it does in ours too, but it's not the only thing we talk about. The final circle is the least comfortable one. It's sexualization, or the use of sexuality to manipulate other people, up to and including assault or harassment. Obviously, we want to avoid that one, but it's helpful sometimes to know about it, and especially to know about the gray areas. Those times we think we know what's going on with a partner, but maybe we don't. Learning to give and receive clear messages about what we want and what we don't is a super important part of sexual education. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hands here, but I am betting that many, if not most of us, have done something at some point we didn't want to do sexually because we didn't want to hurt somebody else's feelings or we didn't want to cause a scene. There's this really great role play exercise in the 10-12 curriculum about two people on a really great date, except one person keeps wanting to take it further and the other isn't comfortable with actually having intercourse, but is enjoying the dancing and kissing, and is finding it hard to say no, and the other partner is really unclear that this person wants to say no. These are important things to talk about and figure out how to navigate. And how much better is it to practice when no one gets hurt, so our kids aren't ever pushed into situations they don't want to be in, and so our kids don't push anyone else into a situation they don't want to be in. Broadly defined, sexuality is a deeply integrated experience. It's about intimacy and consent and sensuality. It's about connection and closeness. Nadia Bolz-Weber, in her book Shameless, says, "Holiness is the union we experience with one another and with God. Holiness is when more than one become one, and what is fractured is made whole. Singing in harmony, nursing a baby, collective bargaining, dancing, admitting our pain to someone and hearing them say, 'Me too.' Holiness happens when we are integrated as physical, spiritual, emotional, and political beings. Holiness is the song that has always been sung." I am so grateful to be part of a community that believes that it is a good and holy thing to learn about sex and intimacy and bodies and feelings all centered in love. Blessed be, and amen.